All right, everyone, we are going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all so much for joining us today for the April Outdoor Florida webinar. Today we're joined by two guests from the Florida Trail Association to talk about best practices for managing a trail volunteer program, of course, in recognition of April being National Volunteer Month. The Florida Trail Association works with hundreds of volunteers who donate thousands of hours to maintain the Florida National Scenic Trail every year. So we're really excited for these two ladies here to share their expertise with us on this topic. Just to introduce our speakers a little bit, Jane Pollack is going to get us started this morning, and she is the Communications and Outreach Manager for FTA. Jane has worked in a variety of nonprofit settings, from academic publishing to sustainable food systems, before she came to work with the Florida Trail Association. She has a degree in English from the University of Florida, and prior to taking on her current role in 2022, she served as the Gateway Communities Coordinator with the Florida Trail Association. After Jane, we are going to go ahead and hear from Jenna. Jenna is the Central and South Region Trail Manager for FTA, and she has a BA in Psychology and Communications from Flagler College, along with a master's degree in social work and certificates in nonprofit and emergency management from Florida State University. Before joining the Florida Trail Association, she served as the AmeriCorps Program Director for a chapter of the Big Brothers Big Sisters for 8 years. At the end of our presentation today, we will have a question and answer portion. So as I mentioned earlier, please go ahead and hold your questions until the end, or you can put them in the chat as we go, and then we'll read them once we finish up. And just a reminder today that our webinar is being recorded and will be available to review on the Florida State Parks YouTube page at the end of the week or early next week. All right, I think we've just about covered it. So if you'd like to get us started, Jane, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Sure. Thank you so much, Anna, for the great introduction. Really happy to be here. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Go ahead and share. All right. So I was really excited when Anna invited us on to talk about a topic that we engage with a lot here at FTA. We'll be telling you a bit about how we manage our volunteer program. So here's a bit about what we're planning on covering today. First, we'll talk about what is the Florida National Scenic Trail for those who aren't familiar. Who are we, the FTA? I'll go over our outreach program and our volunteer program. They really go hand in hand. We'll go over some of our successes and challenges with our volunteer program. And then we'd love to leave a decent amount of time for Q&A so that we can hear from where you all need guidance and how we can help. So what is the Florida Trail? The Florida National Scenic Trail, better known as the Florida Trail, extends from Pensacola in the Panhandle to Big Cypress National Preserve in the south and connects the state's unique natural, cultural, and historic resources and offers year-round opportunities for residents to recreate. The Florida Trail is over 1,500 miles long and stretches through some of the most beautiful and unique landscapes in the state. Our northern terminus is at Gulf Islands National Seashore near Pensacola Beach in the Panhandle, and the southern terminus is in Big Cypress National Preserve in the Everglades. So the Florida Trail sees over 400,000 visitors per year, and that number comes from data gathered by a UF professor who has a research project gathering information about the Florida Trail using trail counters throughout the state. Like many outdoor organizations, we saw definitely a spike in that number during COVID, and it seems to be sustaining, so that's exciting. There are over 18 million people within the state of Florida who can hop on the trail within an hour's drive. So it's pretty accessible. There are over 160 entry points or trailheads. So this is a statewide map of the Florida Trail if you've never seen it. So down in the South, Big Cypress, as I mentioned, extending up through the state and ending in Pensacola Beach. So I just provided, I don't know if this presentation will be shared, but these are actually all links to some great resources that we have created for the public to explore the Florida Trail. There's a couple story maps on here. One of my favorites is the natural community ecology along the Florida Trail. There's an interactive map where folks can find trailheads, campsites, water sources, things like that. Our Junior Explorer Guide for kids, that's a great resource. So maybe just some things to explore in your own time. I won't get into them too much today. Okay, so who is the FTA? The Florida Trail Association is responsible for building, maintaining, and protecting and promoting the Florida National Scenic Trail, or just simply we say the Florida Trail. The Forest Service is our primary partner and administrator, and together we provide opportunities for the public to hike and engage in outdoor recreation, as well as participate in environmental education and contribute to meaningful volunteer work. So one of my favorite things about the Florida Trail is that the trail itself was established in 1966. It was the grassroots initiative, and that's when the FTA was established. And then it wasn't until 1983 that we got our National Scenic Trail designation, which I thought that would be the next slide. Yeah, so this year we're celebrating 40 years as a National Scenic Trail. So that's really exciting. I wanted to also provide some detail about our main partnership with the Forest Service. So they provide our main oversight and administration, and we collaborate with them on a number of projects. We host volunteer construction, maintenance, and development program for the Florida Trail. And it's actually mentioned in our agreement with the Forest Service and in the National Trail System Act that there's a critical role played by volunteers and private citizens in the development of national trails. So it's really important that we engage volunteers in all aspects of our program. We also coordinate and collaborate with the Forest Service on all Florida Trail projects, including trail construction and trail support facilities like trailheads, kiosks, bridges, boardwalks, and shelters. And we also collaborate with the Forest Service and our land managers about any new construction or improvements on the Florida Trail to make sure that the safety standards are met and certain regulations that the Forest Service has laid out. And additionally, we provide volunteer and partner staff training opportunities for safe trail construction and maintenance techniques, as well as volunteer management. And Jenna will be going into those a bit more in detail. So our partnership with the Forest Service is based on a challenge cost share agreement. So basically the Forest Service provides a certain amount of funding to the Florida Trail program, and the FTA is asked to match or exceed that amount, which is usually met by the monetary value of volunteer hours. So right now, I believe the federal rate for volunteer service hour is about $28. And that's just one of the reasons why it's important for us to track our volunteer hours in our database, which I'll get into a bit about that. So the Florida National Scenic Trail Coalition is a diverse collection of trail partners who provide input about the development and maintenance and promotion of the Florida Trail. So here's just a collection of some of our coalition members. They meet twice a year. So just for an example on how we work together with our partners on various things, right now we're working on doing a grand opening celebration of a bridge at Crabgrass Creek that Jenna actually led up that project alongside volunteers. And we want to celebrate that exciting new bridge. So we're partnering with FWC and folks from Osceola County to invite the public to celebrate that with us. Okay, so STA staff, we have a pretty small staff. There's about 13 of us. I'm mainly focusing on sort of what we call the trail team here. So these are our regional trail managers. Jeff is in the North region. Jenna, who's with us today, is in the Central South, and Catherine is in the Panhandle. So our regional trail managers are responsible for engaging volunteers around our trail program. They also coordinate with land managers and volunteers to ensure the protection and maintenance of the Florida Trail. They assess the trail on a yearly basis for safety, connectivity, infrastructure needs, and land use issues, work to close gaps in the trail. And yeah, their main job is kind of coordinating with the chapters to make sure that the trail gets maintained every year, which is no small feat. One of the big things that they do in our busy season, the trail season in the fall, is organizing and scheduling our volunteer work parties. We usually host between like 12 and 14 statewide events each year, which Jenna will probably go into more detail on. But those are great volunteer opportunities for first-time volunteers to get involved. We provide a campsite, we provide all the food, tools, and training. And those volunteers just show up, and even if you've never done trail maintenance before, you can hop right in. So we try to promote those at our tabling events and outreach events. And speaking of outreach, so kind of the other side of the trail team are the folks who are engaging with the community to get folks excited about the Florida Trail and encourage them to get involved. So here's me, Jane. My position is mainly focused on building the volunteer program by engaging partners and volunteers. I work on increasing public awareness of the trail, and as well as promoting volunteer opportunities and promoting just folks to get out and enjoy the Florida Trail. So I do a lot of that on social media as well. I manage our volunteer database and provide those reports I was referencing about our volunteer accomplishments. And yeah, I'm going to talk about our other outreach initiatives because these are really essential to promoting and educating about the trail and encouraging the community to get involved. So in the past year or so, we've dedicated a lot of time and energy into these two programs that I oversee. So this is Rachel. She's our Next Gen Coalition Coordinator, and Haley, our Gateway Communities Coordinator. I believe they're on the call with us today. And I'm just going to provide a brief overview of those two outreach programs and how they work on encouraging new volunteers to get plugged in as well. So the Next Gen Coalition. This program was sort of launched in response to us realizing that we have an aging volunteer base on the Florida Trail. We love our volunteers and they do such incredible work, but it is important to recognize that some folks are getting to where they can't get out on the trail. And as you see these folks building, a small footbridge. So we realized that we needed to inspire the next generation of folks to become trail stewards. So that's really what this program is all about. Their mission is to engage, educate, and encourage young people to become involved in the management and stewardship of the trail. And we just recently hosted our first in-person retreat for these Next Gen folks. Rachel led that up and she's a great leader for the group. So the main focus of that was to create a strategic plan on how they're going to go about getting more young folks on the trail. So one of the big projects that they'll be doing each year is hosting one of their own volunteer work parties geared towards the younger audience. So last year was the first time that we hosted one of those work parties, and we collaborated with the Highlanders chapter in Central Florida. And it was just really cool to see kind of those folks who had been trail maintainers for so many years, decades even, and were so familiar with that section of trail in the Ocala National Forest, and they were kind of passing the baton to these younger folks. Some of them had never done trail maintenance before. So it was really neat to see. There was one gentleman in the Highlanders chapter who's in his 90s and still goes out on the trail, which is pretty cool. And they were just so happy to welcome this new wave of younger folks who will be taking care of the trail in the future. So that's really important, and just keep your eyes peeled for all the exciting things that this group is going to do. All right, yeah, another outreach program that's focused on engaging our communities is the Gateway Communities program. So as Anna mentioned, I actually started out working in this program. This is a mutually beneficial program that connects Florida Trail hikers to local businesses in the community and serves to make visitors aware of the Florida Trail as a recreational resource. I really like the way Haley puts it. I put her quote up here. It's about bringing hikers into the community and bringing community members onto the trail. I think that's a really great way of looking at it. We think it's just important for FTA to have a presence in the communities where the trail passes through. In order to, I mean, some folks don't even know that the Florida Trail is in their backyard, but we're trying to encourage citizens and business owners and just folks in the community to invest in this incredible resource that's in their backyard. And one way that we try to engage volunteers in our Gateway communities, this is nice because, you know, our volunteers aren't just focused on trail maintenance. They can be involved in something like getting their town designated as a Gateway community. So we try to encourage volunteers to be involved in that designation process. And a lot of times it's really essential to have that local advocate there, like to navigate the process and show local government that citizens have a vested interest in the trail. So that's just another way to get involved besides trail maintenance. And we love to participate in the community events and annual festivals that happen in these towns. So for example, Haley just recently worked with the city of Pollack to celebrate their designation. So we had a ribbon cutting ceremony in Ravine Gardens State Park. And that was actually a collaboration with the Florida Wildlife Corridor because they just so happened to be starting off one of their expeditions to raise awareness about the wildlife corridor. So since we have that common mission, we collaborated on that event. And that's just another great way to sort of get volunteers plugged in, you know, get the word out about the Florida Trail. And there was a big volunteer effort in getting that designation and even in that event itself. So our chapters are the heart of the Florida Trail Association. We have 19 statewide chapters. Each one, basically, every county is represented by a chapter, as you can see on the color-coded map, and each chapter is sort of assigned a section of trail that they're responsible for maintaining. So that's one of the big activities that they do are trail maintenance projects. But they also do just fun outdoor activities like guided hikes, paddling, things like that. They have monthly chapter meetings. And when you become a member of the FTA, you get connected with your local chapter. So that's sort of how we usher in our new members is, kind of letting the chapter take the lead. And so we do rely on our chapters in that way. And it is a big volunteer recruitment tool. It kind of varies from chapter to chapter. I'll get into this a bit when we talk about successes and challenges, but different chapters kind of have varying levels of involvement. Some of them are out there doing stuff every single week. They have a great, trail maintenance plans sort of posted on their website, and it's easy for folks to get plugged in. Others are not as active because, again, this is all volunteer initiative. But that's one way, those chapter activities are a major volunteer recruitment tool. So we try to promote those and empower our chapters. And like I mentioned earlier, another, just being in your local chapter and working on the administrative duties of your chapter is a volunteer service in and of itself. And we often rely on our volunteers to be plugged into what's happening in their local communities. So our volunteers and our local chapters are always at, various seafood festivals and local outdoor festivals, tabling and getting the word out about the trail. So we certainly appreciate that. And I think this is where I pass it off to Jenna to talk about our volunteers.
Great, thanks, Jane. So yes, I'm going to dig a little bit more into kind of our I wonder why that picture is gone. Our volunteers and our structure, and just kind of how we think that we engage them and ultimately retain them. And so as Jane mentioned, we kind of use volunteers in 3 ways. Our primary way of using our volunteers is, of course, trail maintenance. So I just had this conversation with somebody in a meeting just before this, and she was like, "Oh, but like you use contractors, right, to do the maintenance?" And I said, "No." I said, every single mile of our trail is completely maintained by our volunteers. And so that looks 2 different ways. That's the state-led events, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. But primarily that's a lot of chapter-led activity. So it's a lot of volunteers that are getting out there week after week and just getting the work done 1 mile at a time. And then we do a lot with infrastructure. So if you're not from Florida, but you probably know this anyway, Florida is very wet. And so we are finding ourselves doing more and more infrastructure projects. And that is an area where we used to do some contract work. But as our team has grown and as our team has started to really hone in some of their skill sets, and we've started to take some of that infrastructure work on ourselves. And so what that has led to, intentionally or unintentionally, is that we have a real core group of volunteers that infrastructure is just like, that's their thing. So I don't know why, but every volunteer or every engineer that retires in the state of Florida finds the Florida Trail Association, and I'm not mad about it. And I think they're all in my region. And so we have this group of infrastructure volunteers that we've now been able to train on things. That's what's photographed there is on our pneumatic pile driver. Some of these really specific skills that we can now travel around the state and do these types of projects. And then, as Jane mentioned, we do a lot of administrative volunteering, have a lot of administrative volunteers rather, and that can include things like tabling, like Jane mentioned, but that also is a lot of skills-based volunteer work. And so that can include things like volunteers who can do mapping projects for us, volunteers who can help us just administratively in the office with our store, with our spreadsheets, things like that, getting out and doing reroute scouting and collecting data on where those infrastructure projects or pieces are throughout the state, things like that. And of course, obviously, our board is a huge part of our volunteer base, and so they're serving in a lot of governance roles and supporting the staff in what we're doing there. Next slide, Jane. And so kind of what that boils down to, we have in 2021, 17,335 hours of service. And I think what's important about that number is that is, yes, that's represented by the staff events that we lead, but there's only 14 of those. And so that number is primarily these chapter-led or just individuals getting out and doing the work on the trail. And as Jane mentioned, there's a value associated with those hours. So, we really educate our volunteers on the importance of logging those hours to help us get to that number. Because if we did have to contract this work out, we want to make sure that we can capture kind of what that would cost, what they're offering us. Those hours were done in 2021 by 382 unique volunteers. And some of those volunteers, they're one time, they come out, it's done in a day, they loved it. It was a great way to engage, but we never see them again. But the majority of our volunteers are showing up to everything. We have, a good group of volunteers that are traveling all over the state and supporting other chapters. And it's really cool to see. And Jane mentioned, our aging volunteer base just means that we're constantly looking for new ways to bring volunteers in and create kind of that next generation. I was just talking with a new leader and I said, okay, like you're starting now, but let's start talking about your succession plan, whether that's in 5 years or 10 years, like we need to be talking about it. And I think we're having more and more of those conversations because of our aging volunteer base. And so the structure, well, my pictures aren't there. The structure of our chapters starts kind of at the board level. So that Trails Policy and Development Committee, that's run within our board and some chapter leadership members. And they're the folks who are responsible for overseeing our trail manual and some of our other guiding documents. And those folks are in direct communication with what we call a trail coordinator. And so the trail coordinator sits within each of our 19 chapters, and they're responsible for the trail maintenance that's in their region. And that's the person that the regional trail coordinators like myself work the closest with. And we, work with them to make sure that the trail gets maintained. Under them, they often will break the trail up into what we call sections. So if a trail coordinator is responsible for 90 miles of trail, perhaps they have 5 section leaders under them who are, breaking that into smaller sections. And sometimes that breaks down even smaller into what we call trail stewards. So maybe they have, 3 or 4 miles or even just 1 mile of trail. And they get out there and do the pre-scouting for some of our events. So they'll know, and if that photo was there, you'd be able to see. They would know, where the down trees are so that they can send Sawyer teams there. They can work with the crew leaders to make sure the right equipment, it's no point in sending a mower out on a section if it's just going to float down the trail. And so we really rely on kind of those levels of our chapter structure to support the work we're doing. And ultimately, these are the folks that are making my job a lot easier. I have about 600 miles of trail. I could never intimately know it. And so I think having this structure, number one, gives folks a lot of ownership and keeps them coming back and keeps them staying here. But also it makes this work possible. We wouldn't be able to do it kind of without this structure. One thing that's not on this slide, sorry, Jane, that I'll mention is that we have, so my brain kind of only thinks maintenance, but we do have the similar structure for other roles in our organization. So each chapter has a chair, a vice chair, a membership coordinator, an outreach coordinator, and secretary, treasurer, those types of things that again report up to our board. So there's a lot of opportunity for volunteers, maybe if maintenance isn't their thing, to still find a leadership role. And I think that's important. Now you can go. And so one thing I think that the FTA is most proud of is the ability to provide so much training to our volunteers, because a volunteer is only as effective as what you tell them and how to do it. And so, of course, at any work party, we're doing kind of on the ground, this is how you run a mower, this is how you don't get hurt kind of training. But we really try to hone in and offer some specialized training for the work that we're doing as well. And so we used to do a statewide, what we called a trail skills class, and volunteers would come together and we would teach them kind of the nitty gritty of like tool maintenance and trail maintenance and things like that. But what we were finding is that wasn't really engaging our new like the people who actually needed that training. We were getting a lot of repeat customers, which isn't a bad thing, but it really wasn't serving the purpose. And also, doing trail maintenance in Big Cypress is very different than doing trail maintenance in the Ocala. And so what we're shifting to is a regionally based trail skills class. I hosted the first one of these in 2021 in the Big Cypress, because that is an area that has very limited volunteers because the work is really challenging. And so we piloted it there. That's some of our volunteers digging through the trail manual on a little quiz, just as riveting as it sounds. But we are looking to do more of those throughout the state so that we can provide that as kind of a recruitment tool, as well as regionally based, fine tuning what they're doing. We also are able to offer chainsaw certification for our volunteers in-house now. We have 2 trainers who are part of our team, and with them being on our team now, we're able to offer those more frequently. So we're really, really proud of how robust our Sawyer program has become. And again, we're able to do those regionally, and so able to offer, kind of some specifics as of what that looks like for those volunteers. We offer activity leader training. So as Jane mentioned, one arm of our organization is focused really on the maintenance, but then the other side can be really that social recreational activity type of work. And so we do require that our activity leaders be trained, and so they're able to how to promote, how to plan, how to safely get everybody you're left with back to the trailhead type of training. And that also requires that they co-lead some events, and so they're able to really see how to do that successfully. And then finally, something else we're really proud of that we started new this year is we're able to host our wilderness first aid in-house. So one of our board members received his certification to be able to teach these classes, and it has been a huge success. First aid is great, but wilderness first aid is better. And our volunteers are really grateful for this opportunity. It's just a fun class, but I think this has been huge, and it definitely makes me feel better as a crew leader, knowing I have so many folks who have received this really intensive 2-day first aid training. Next. And so this, Anna had asked us just to briefly touch on, this is a hyperlink too, so if this does get shared, it'll link back to our website, but just all of the things that we have people sign before they are doing volunteer work with us. Feel free to borrow or, as you see fit. If anybody has really specific questions about this, I'd be happy to chat with you offline about it or take it in the Q&A, but we do have these very specific JHAs. So if you're going to be working with a chainsaw, our mowers, our candy comms, some of those more specific things, we do have JHAs for that we cover as a part of our tailgate safety session. So every event has a tailgate safety session where we're having folks sign these forms, but we're also reviewing them. And we require that this happens whether it's somebody's 100th time volunteering or it's their first time. And we go over these because you can never remind people enough about how to be safe. And we do allow for youth volunteers, and so we have a waiver for that as well. And so I think what makes a volunteer program successful, and really what I think makes our volunteer program successful, are these opportunities for connection. So we do volunteer surveys every year. Of course, like no nonprofit exists without surveys. And so the overwhelming thing that people say, like, why did you come? What did you enjoy? Is the opportunity to connect with people that are of the same mindset or doing the same work. And so we are very intentional about this. And so I think the primary ways that people are kind of connecting kind of fall into these 3 categories. Number one are state-led events. And so our state-led events are ways that we are engaging with new volunteers because they're the ones that we're promoting at tabling events and on social media. And so this tends to bring in some new folks that we can, engage with seasoned volunteers. And we usually, once they have that connection with some of those seasoned volunteers, like we've got them. They start coming back, and of course, I don't want to say that my cooking is why they come back, but feeding volunteers, it always helps. Providing a campsite, having a space where if they're a new camper and it's scary, this is a very safe place, very judgment-free zone to kind of learn about backpacking and camping. Number two, I think chapter activities are huge, because we do have folks that come in and, like, again, they don't want to push a mower. That sounds terrible to them. So these chapter activities can be a lot more fun, and sometimes they can serve a purpose. And so there are things like recreational hikes and backpacking classes, of course, but they're also often partner events with some of our partnering agencies. So this photo in the center is one of my chapters that partners with Biscayne Bay National Park, and they do a trash cleanup. And number one, I'm just jealous because I really want to go with them, and they just did it. But they collect hundreds and hundreds of pounds of trash, and they paddle out to do this, and it just becomes this whole thing. One of my other chapters does a lot of urban hikes because they're in Miami, and they talk a lot about the history of Florida, and they engage with historians about the Gladesmans, and I think there's just, that tends to be really engaging for a lot of folks. And then finally, just really unique kind of special events. So we have things like I did a hike in the Southern Regional Conference, which are collaborative events where volunteers from throughout the state, or non-volunteers, non-members, are coming together and hiking or participating in some kind of education opportunity. Chapters are doing things like backpacking trips together out of state. They're offering bike rides, and there's just a lot that our chapters are doing that create these opportunities for connection. Next slide. And so our chapters are also, I just want to briefly touch on, I'm so sad. I just want to briefly touch on these. I don't know that our chapter meetings or newsletters are how we are getting people in the door, but I think that these help contribute to why we're keeping them. So all our volunteer chapters typically do some sort of monthly meeting. There's typically some sort of speaker, and then chapter business, and kind of a rundown of like what's going on. There's usually a social element, and snacks or a hike or something, I don't know, usually food. But I think that we're seeing a change, a shift in this. I think COVID brought more people to these meetings because I think it's a lot less scary to log into a Zoom meeting than it is to walk in the door of an event for the first time. And I don't know how we'll see these kind of grow and change over the years, but it's just something worth noting. It is a way for chapters to connect, but I don't know that they're as engaging as maybe the previous three, but I think it's still important. And so, it's important to find these people, but it's more important to keep these people. And so a few of the things that I think contribute to why our volunteers stick around. Number one, I think the membership model is important. I think it gives volunteers a sense of belonging to something, but there's also a structure to grow. I mean, you can come be a member and just hang around for 50 years, and that's great, but I wouldn't think that ever happens. There's a lot of room to get involved and find what makes you happy and makes you grow. And there's also a lot of opportunity for autonomy. And I think that really helps our volunteers stick around. So folks, who are in those trail coordinator roles or section leader roles, oftentimes they are communicating directly with our land managers and our partners. And I think having that sense of trust in them and them being able to feel that with that autonomy keeps them around. It keeps them feeling engaged. And then, we of course do awards. Like, everyone likes to feel good and get an award. But I think the reason I want to mention these awards is because I think it is significant that we have folks who have received 25 and 50 year awards. Like, to be able as an organization to say we have folks who have been part of our organization for 50 years feels really significant. I think that connection to the National Scenic Trail as a whole too makes people feel like they're part of this big thing, and I think that helps keep people around. And finally, passion and relationships. I always have said like you have, number one, you have to want to do this work to show up in Florida heat in push and mower. Like you have to want to do this. And when I first started, I was very overwhelmed and kind of intimidated by how much people love the trail. And I still, like, every time I'm out with volunteers, I'm just humbled by how much they love this. And I think that's why they stick around. I think it's something that they have a lot of ownership and love for. It gives them a lot of purpose. So I think those things really help our folks stay. Oh, that's you.
Thanks, Jenna. That was awesome. So I just kind of wanted to talk about some of our successes and challenges within our volunteer program and kind of our organization at large, and kind of what are the learning moments here. So yeah, I think, like Jenna was just alluding to, we have such a long line of history. We have such dedicated volunteers. It's really incredible to work with these folks, and they just dedicate so much time and energy. I guess on the other hand, since some of these folks have been involved for so many years, like we've mentioned, that means we do have an aging volunteer base. So we're in the process of finding solutions. You know, our Next Gen Coalition is one way that we're trying to encourage younger volunteers to get on the trail. Jenna mentioned succession plans for, you know, those chapter leadership roles. Before folks are unable to do those duties anymore, we want to make sure we have someone who's sort of next in line and getting trained on how to do those roles. Yeah, another big success is, I think we provide a lot of fulfilling volunteer opportunities and meaningful relationships. When you're hanging out with a chapter, it's like these folks have been friends for years. They've experienced so much together, worked together on the trail. They also play together on the trail. They go out and do all kinds of incredible things. And you just really get that sense of community. It's one of my favorite parts about the Florida Trail. And then at the same time, as I sort of mentioned earlier, there's a varying level of involvement across the chapters and across regions of Florida. So, you know, the Central Florida chapter, for example, is super active. You can easily get plugged in with their events. I think they're the biggest chapter in the state, you know, and then there are some smaller chapters who are just sort of, maybe they need a boost. And that's kind of something that we've recently, you know, I would love to provide more support to those chapters to ensure their success, because that really ultimately is our success too. So sort of empowering them with what they need to be a strong chapter. And then that kind of goes along with, you know, one of our successes. I do think we provide a lot of resources for our volunteers. If you go on our website, there's like a volunteer corner, and that includes the crew leader resources. It has all of that safety information that Jenna was going over. There's kind of a new outreach section on that website that has like PDFs of all of our brochures and things, so folks can just like download those and print them and easily be able to work on outreach if they want to. And again, that requires, you know, a lot of support on our end to make sure that our volunteers are empowered. Yeah, so and then these last two kind of go hand in hand again. So our partnerships are one of our big successes that we celebrate. One thing that I think is neat for our land manager partners is that they can capitalize on our volunteer hours for funding purposes as well. So sometimes I'll get, you know, one of our regional trail managers will ask me to pull from our database an hours report of the number of hours that were worked in a year or a season for a certain section of trail that's maybe within a certain water management district. And that land manager wants to see those numbers, and they can kind of leverage that to say, like, here's the amount of work that's been done in our area. And then sort of the challenge with that is that our volunteer hours reporting database is somewhat new. It was brand new when I was brought into this position. I think it was launched in the fall of 2021, and it's been quite a learning curve. We've had to get our volunteers trained up on how to use that system. And we all know that learning something new, it can be really challenging. So that's one thing that we're still working on. Some of our chapters really are doing awesome with volunteer hours reporting, but it's definitely a big project to tackle. This summer, I'm going to work on kind of rebooting our training resources for our volunteers and how we can better support them. Because as we mentioned, our volunteer hours reporting is really important for our funding agreement with the Forest Service, for our volunteer recognition as well. So like Jenna mentioned, the awards, a lot of those are based on how many hours have been contributed, and we want to recognize those folks. And also, every volunteer who's done like 5 hours or more gets a t-shirt or a swag item. So we want to be able to provide those. So those are kind of some of the things that we mentioned. We're trying to encourage folks to stick with it with the database and get those hours recognized. And I believe that is all we have. And we would love to hear some questions from you all.
Yeah, great. Thank you guys so much for those that great presentation, all those different topics that you were able to cover. So if anyone who is watching live have a question, feel free to put that in the chat. We do have a couple that were sent in from people who couldn't join the live webinar, but will watch the recording. But we'll open it up for live questions first. Go ahead and unmute yourself or put them in the chat.
Hi, my name is Leslie. Can I ask, how do you actually join one of the chapters? Is there a link to follow for that? And thank you so much for a great program.
Yeah, so we had a question from Leslie. How does someone join a chapter of the FTA?
Sure. Yeah, so the best thing to do is on floridatrail.org, that's our website. There's a button for become a member, and that's a really simple form to fill out. You'll get connected with your chapter once you become a member, but you can also go under Get Involved tab on our website, and under the volunteer section on the left-hand side, there's a link to find your local chapter, and you'll see that color-coded map that I shared earlier. And on this page, all of our 19 chapters are listed. There's kind of just information about what section of trail they maintain, and then link to their website or Meetup or Facebook, just kind of depending on what platform they use to share their events.
Okay, great, thanks. And is there a cost for that membership?
It's $35 annually.
Okay, great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question in the chat from Anna, and she asked, what are your favorite recruitment efforts, and what have you noticed works best for your program as far as recruitment?
I can start on that, and maybe Jane can wrap it. Yeah, so I think I know it's not necessarily a strategic, like an actual strategy, but definitely what works best for our organization is word of mouth, and I know that volunteers bringing in other volunteers is really helpful. But then I think we tend to be a secret, and I think just the more I know it's old school, but tabling is really, really effective. We have a partnership with REI, which I think is helping our visibility a lot. And that has helped in my region, at least with recruitment quite a bit. Both at tabling events, we had one of our REIs would put we got them some flyers of our work parties, and they were putting them in everybody's bags. And so sometimes I think just that repeated impact, and then having that immediate touch point. So if you do engage with somebody, immediate touch point and follow up, or here's immediately how you can get out on a hike, come out to an event. I think that's really important.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have another question here from James, who's asking, are you using a commercial product to track volunteer hours? And if so, what product do you use for that?
Yeah, so I meant to mention that actually. The database that we use, it's called Galaxy Digital. And this was kind of like a system that was launched before I was brought on board. So I don't know too much about the process, but we sort of worked with them to fine tune that system to what we need. And we're still kind of working out the kinks. So yeah, and it's there's an annual subscription to it. I was going to look into how much that costs, but it is a chunk of money for sure. But it's definitely a really important aspect of what we do.
All right, great. Thank you for answering that. I am going to read a couple of the questions that were sent in as well. Do you have a method for collecting background information on your volunteers, such as their skills or interests? And if so, how do you use that information to set them up for success? It seems difficult to do that with such a large volunteer program.
I can take that, Jane. Yeah, so that is a piece that the Galaxy Digital system can do for us. And so when folks sign on there to be a volunteer, they can select what they're interested in, and then that helps connect the local chapters who can then do outreach to the individuals and kind of help plug them in. And so we don't just limit that to like trail maintenance broadly. It really does break down even into like, maybe you just want to come out and help in the camp kitchen, so that helps us too. And I think a lot of people can be intimidated by the maintenance side. I've been working locally with some of my chapters on creating a digital tool for tabling. So what I think with like the rebirth of the QR code, I felt, volunteers were like, I get this spreadsheet, this, form, and people have written their emails down and I can't read them. And so we have moved to I'm helping some of my chapters move to a scannable QR code for their tabling events so that they can have a log. And then again, going back to that like immediate touch point, then it's a lot quicker for them to send some kind of a welcome email and start to connect with them. We're testing that.
Great, thank you. The next question, maybe Jane could answer this one, is about social media. Do you find that social media has been effective for recruiting volunteers? And if so, do you try to target some of your posts as recruitment posts? And I think just in general, social media and volunteering, has that been successful, or do you use it for kind of other purposes?
Yeah, great question. I think social media is really important for recruitment. We have 10,000 followers, which is pretty huge. And one of the biggest questions that I get, whether it's like just on a social media comment or coming into my inbox, is just like, how do I get involved? How do I volunteer? So even though like that information is all on our website, and it's just so important to like reiterate that. So I sort of just do those basic like how to volunteer on the Florida Trail posts from time to time. It definitely ramps up around the trail maintenance season in the fall. So before the webinar, we were chatting with Anna about a promo item that we distribute throughout the state at our tabling events and our outreach events. We call them a project card. So it's like a square. And that's like a pretty art card on one side, sort of just something to like grab your attention, something that you want to take home with you, or something that you'd see on social media and be like, whoa, what is that? And then on the other side, it's a statewide map that has pinpoints for all of those volunteer work parties that are happening throughout the state. So yeah, definitely during that time of year, I sort of ramp up on encouraging folks to volunteer with us.
Great, thanks for that info. And we'll end it with one more question here. And I think this is kind of to expand more on your Next Gen Coalition. And if you have any specific strategies that you found successful for recruiting those younger volunteers that you've noticed with the start of your Next Gen Coalition.
Yeah, so as far as recruiting the Next Gen Coalition members themselves, there's about 13 of them, and that's an application cycle that happens in the fall. We've really only had the program's only been around for a year and a half, but that's something that we did promote on social media a lot, and we got a decent number of applications. So then the idea is that those Next Gen Coalition members work alongside STA staff to reach that younger generation. So they're literally working on kind of the plan on how to do that. I've had them do like social media posts and stuff. I would love for them to do sort of like a social media takeover just to get their voice. But the Next Gen volunteer work party that I mentioned, like I was pretty blown away because I've attended volunteer work parties, and a lot of times it's usually sort of our diehard volunteers who we know and love and absolutely appreciate. But with that Next Gen volunteer work party, it was like 14 brand new people. And I was like, wow, I guess this is sort of like what happens when you bill something as like, yes, we want you to come, you know, this is for those younger folks, and promote it that way on social media and have photos of like people who look like them, a diverse group of volunteers. So yeah, and that group is like definitely in a big growth spurt right now. So I'm really excited to see the new ways that we'll come up with to attract younger volunteers.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's great information that a lot of people are interested in knowing about, and definitely something that we'll want to keep watch of and see how that program grows for you guys. So we are going to go ahead and wrap up here with the end of our webinar. Thank you all who joined us live today, and those of you who will be watching our recording. Thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Jane, for sharing all of your experience with us. And just a reminder that we'll be sending out a follow-up email after this webinar with information about how you can get some of the resources they mentioned during the presentation. I can add their presentation in so you can get those links, as well as a link to a survey. If you have ideas for future webinars that you would like us to cover, you can go ahead and fill that out. And the recording of this will be available on the Florida State Parks YouTube page early next week. And with that, I think we have one more comment in the chat, just to people saying thank you for the presentation and things like that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye today. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month.